For thousands of years, the towering Alps have stood as an almost impenetrable wall across the heart of Europe. Hidden among these snow-covered peaks is a country that has become famous for peace, wealth, precision, and neutrality. But behind the modern image of chocolate, luxury watches, and secure banks lies a history filled with bloodshed, courage, and relentless determination. Long before Switzerland became one of the world's most stable nations, it was a rugged land where survival depended on strength, resilience, and the willingness to fight for freedom. How did a handful of mountain communities survive against some of the greatest empires in history? How did ordinary farmers defeat powerful armies led by heavily armored knights? And how did a nation once feared across Europe eventually become the symbol of peace? The answers stretch back more than 2,000 years, to a time when Rome ruled much of the known world, and the Alps were home to fierce Celtic tribes. Before the name Switzerland ever existed, this land belonged to the Helvetii. They were one of the largest Celtic tribes living in Central Europe. The Helvetii were skilled warriors, experienced hunters, and hard-working farmers who had learned to survive in the harsh mountain environment. Their villages were built on hills and valleys surrounded by dense forests, rushing rivers, and towering cliffs. Life was difficult, but the mountains also protected them from many enemies. The Helvetii valued courage above almost everything else. Young men trained with spears, shields, and swords from an early age, knowing that conflict could arrive without warning. Tribal leaders earned respect not because of wealth, but because they could protect their people in battle. Families lived closely together, sharing food, livestock, and responsibilities as every season brought new challenges. The mountains shaped their character, teaching them endurance, independence, and unity. By the 1st century before Christ, pressure from neighboring tribes and the search for better land forced the Helvetii to make a bold decision. Rather than remain in their crowded homeland, they planned a massive migration westward. Entire families packed their belongings, gathered their livestock, and prepared to leave behind the valleys their ancestors had called home for generations. It was one of the largest migrations attempted by any Celtic tribe, involving tens of thousands of people moving together across Europe. But their journey caught the attention of one ambitious Roman general. His name was Julius Caesar. At that time, Caesar had recently become governor of Gaul and was searching for an opportunity to expand Roman power while building his own reputation. When he learned that such a large tribal migration was approaching Roman territory, he saw more than a military threat. He saw the perfect chance to begin a campaign that could change both his future and the future of Europe. Caesar quickly ordered bridges destroyed, defensive positions strengthened, and his disciplined legions prepared for war. Unlike the tribal warriors, Roman soldiers trained together every single day. They marched in perfect formation, built fortified camps with remarkable speed, and followed orders with absolute discipline. Each legionary carried standardized weapons and relied on teamwork rather than individual bravery. It was a military machine unlike anything the Helvetii had ever faced. The two forces finally met near the town of Bibracte in 58 BC. The battle was fierce. The Helvetii fought with incredible courage, charging repeatedly against the Roman lines. Their determination impressed even Caesar himself. Yet courage alone could not overcome Rome's organization and experience. After hours of brutal fighting, the Roman legions broke the Celtic resistance. Thousands of Helvetii warriors were killed, and the survivors were forced to return to their homeland under Roman control. Although the Helvetii had been defeated, their spirit was not destroyed. The mountains remained, and so did the fierce determination of the people who called them home. Rome had won the battle, but it had not erased the identity of the land. Instead, the region entered a new chapter that would transform its roads, cities, culture, and future forever. The Romans would call this land Helvetia, a name that still appears on Swiss coins and official documents today, reminding the world that Switzerland's story began long before the nation itself was born. For nearly 5 centuries, Rome transformed the land once ruled by the Helvetii into one of the empire's most valuable Alpine provinces. The Romans did far more than conquer territory. They built roads that cut through mountains, constructed strong bridges across rushing rivers, and founded prosperous towns that connected northern and southern Europe. Trade flourished along these routes, bringing merchants, soldiers, craftsmen, and travelers from every corner of the empire. For the first time, the isolated valleys of the Alps became part of one of history's greatest civilizations. Roman engineers achieved what many believed was impossible. They carved roads into steep cliffs, built stone bridges capable of surviving powerful rivers, and established military forts that protected vital mountain passes. These routes allowed armies to move quickly, but they also carried ideas, languages, technology, and commerce. Farmers discovered better agricultural techniques, merchants expanded their businesses, and local communities gradually adopted Roman customs while still preserving many of their Celtic traditions. Life in Roman Helvetia was remarkably stable compared to the constant tribal conflicts of earlier centuries. Bustling marketplaces echoed with different languages as traders exchanged grain, wine, salt, pottery, metal tools, and fine textiles. Public baths became gathering places where people discussed politics and business. Stone villas appeared throughout the countryside, while temples dedicated to Roman gods stood beside older Celtic sacred sites. Rather than erasing local culture completely, Roman influence blended with existing traditions, creating a unique identity that would shape the region for centuries. Yet no empire remains powerful forever. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, Rome faced growing crises across its vast territories. Political instability weakened the government. Economic troubles spread throughout the empire. Civil wars drained valuable resources, and new enemies pressed against every frontier. The mighty Roman legions that had once seemed unstoppable were now forced to defend thousands of miles of borders at the same time. As Roman authority declined, Germanic tribes began crossing into former imperial lands. Among the most influential were the Alemanni, who gradually settled across much of the northern region. Unlike the Romans, they organized themselves into smaller communities led by local chiefs. They brought new customs, languages, and traditions that slowly mixed with the Roman heritage already rooted in the land. This cultural blending would eventually become one of the foundations of modern Switzerland, where different languages and identities continue to exist side by side. By the end of the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed. Across Europe, cities that had once thrived under Roman protection faced uncertainty. Trade routes became less secure, many administrative systems disappeared, and regional rulers competed for power. But the Alps remained exactly where they had always been. Their towering peaks continued to protect the people who lived among them, just as they had protected generations before. Out of this changing world emerged a new ruler whose influence would once again reshape Europe. His name was Charlemagne. During the 8th century, he built one of the largest kingdoms since the fall of Rome. His empire stretched across much of Western and Central Europe, including the lands that would one day become Switzerland. Charlemagne encouraged education, strengthened Christianity, improved administration, and restored order to many regions that had experienced decades of instability. Although Charlemagne's empire eventually divided among his descendants, his rule left a lasting legacy. Monasteries became centers of learning. New towns developed around castles and churches. Mountain communities continued farming, trading, and guarding the strategic Alpine passes that connected Europe from north to south. These passes became increasingly valuable as merchants transported silk, spices, precious metals, and countless other goods across the continent. Whoever controlled the Alpine routes controlled wealth, influence, and military movement. Powerful noble families quickly realized the importance of these mountain crossings. Among them, one dynasty would rise above nearly all others. Their ambition would challenge the independence of the Alpine communities and unknowingly inspire one of history's greatest struggles for freedom. The stage was now set for the rise of the Habsburgs, and with them, the birth of a nation that would forever change the history of Europe. As the centuries passed, the mountain valleys of the Alps became more valuable than ever before. The narrow passes that crossed these towering mountains connected northern Europe with the rich cities of Italy. Every merchant caravan, royal messenger, and marching army depended on these dangerous routes. Whoever controlled the Alpine passes could influence trade, collect taxes, and move armies across the continent. It was only a matter of time before powerful rulers tried to seize them. Among the most ambitious families in medieval Europe were the Habsburgs. From their castles, they steadily expanded their influence across Central Europe, gaining land through war, diplomacy, and strategic marriages. Their growing power eventually reached the Alpine valleys, where they sought tighter control over the local communities. New governors were appointed, taxes increased, and outside officials attempted to replace the long-standing traditions of self-government that mountain villages had protected for generations. But life in the Alps was unlike life in the great kingdoms of Europe. The people of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden had survived for centuries by relying on one another. Farmers worked together to clear fields, maintain mountain paths, and protect livestock from both harsh winters and unexpected attacks. Decisions were often made in local assemblies, where respected members of the community gathered to settle disputes and defend their shared interests. Freedom was not simply an idea to them. It was a way of life, built through cooperation and mutual trust. Everything changed in the summer of 1291. Following the death of King Rudolf of Habsburg, uncertainty spread across the region. Fearing that new rulers might strip away their traditional rights, the leaders of the three forest cantons secretly met to form an alliance. Together they swore an oath to defend one another against foreign domination and to settle internal conflicts peacefully. This agreement, remembered today as the Federal Charter of 1291, is widely regarded as the foundation of the Swiss Confederacy. The document itself was surprisingly simple. It did not proclaim the birth of a great kingdom or promise conquest across Europe. Instead, it focused on unity, cooperation, and the protection of local freedoms. The communities pledged to stand together whenever outside powers threatened their independence. It was a practical agreement created by ordinary people who understood that survival in the mountains depended on trust rather than ambition. Around this period, another story began to spread through the valleys. It was the legend of William Tell. According to tradition, Tell refused to bow before the symbol of Habsburg authority and was forced to shoot an apple from his own son's head with a single arrow. After succeeding, he later escaped captivity and inspired resistance against foreign rule. Historians continue to debate whether William Tell was a real person or a legendary hero created over time. Yet regardless of historical certainty, his story became a powerful symbol of courage, freedom, and the refusal to accept tyranny. As the Confederation grew stronger, more communities recognized the advantages of cooperation. Small villages that had once stood alone now found security in shared defense. Mountain trails became communication routes, alliances expanded, and confidence slowly replaced fear. Yet the Habsburg rulers had no intention of surrendering their influence so easily. To them, these rebellious mountain communities were little more than stubborn peasants, challenging one of Europe's most powerful dynasties. Neither side realized that the conflict approaching would echo across the continent. Knights in shining armor believed discipline, wealth, and noble blood guaranteed victory. Facing them would stand farmers, hunters, and shepherds armed with determination, intimate knowledge of the mountains, and an unbreakable commitment to defend their freedom. In the years ahead, these unlikely warriors would fight battles that stunned medieval Europe and forever changed the reputation of the Swiss people. The first great test of the young Swiss Confederacy came in the year 1315. Determined to crush the growing alliance once and for all, Duke Leopold of Austria gathered a powerful Habsburg army and marched toward the mountain communities. His knights wore heavy steel armor, rode massive war horses, and believed victory was already guaranteed. They expected frightened peasants to scatter at the mere sight of noble cavalry. Instead, they were walking directly into one of the greatest military ambushes of the Middle Ages. The Swiss carefully studied the landscape around the narrow pass near Morgarten. They understood every cliff, every forest trail, and every steep hillside. Rather than meeting the enemy on an open battlefield, they waited patiently above the mountain road. As the long column of armored knights entered the narrow passage between the lake and the rocky slopes, the trap was sprung. Without warning, huge boulders and heavy logs thundered down the mountainside. Chaos erupted instantly. Horses panicked, formations collapsed, and armored knights struggled to escape the confined path. Before the Habsburg army could reorganize, Swiss fighters charged downhill, carrying halberds, axes, and long spears. Fighting at close range, they used speed and knowledge of the terrain to overwhelm an enemy that had seemed impossible to defeat only moments earlier. The Battle of Morgarten ended in a stunning Swiss victory. Across Europe, nobles struggled to believe that ordinary mountain farmers had defeated one of the region's strongest feudal armies. The victory proved that discipline, planning, and terrain could overcome expensive armor and noble titles. More importantly, it strengthened the confidence of the Swiss Confederacy and encouraged additional communities to join their alliance. In the decades that followed, the Confederation continued to expand. New cantons entered the alliance, trade increased, and the reputation of Swiss fighters spread far beyond the Alps. Yet peace remained fragile. The Habsburg dynasty refused to accept defeat, and another confrontation became inevitable. That confrontation arrived in the summer of 1386, near the town of Sempach. Once again, Duke Leopold led a powerful army of armored knights against the Swiss. His forces were larger, wealthier, and equipped with some of the finest weapons available in medieval Europe. Many believed the rebellion would finally be crushed. The battle began under the blazing summer sun. The narrow battlefield limited the movement of the heavily armored cavalry, forcing the knights to fight on foot. The Swiss advanced in tightly packed formations, holding long pikes that created an almost impenetrable wall of sharpened steel. Every soldier understood that survival depended on protecting the men standing beside him. Their unity became their greatest weapon. According to Swiss tradition, a man named Arnold von Winkelried changed the course of the battle forever. Seeing no way through the wall of enemy spears, he is said to have sacrificed himself by throwing his body onto the Habsburg pikes, creating a gap through which his comrades could charge. Historians continue to debate whether the story is entirely true, but like William Tell, the legend became a lasting symbol of self-sacrifice and courage in defense of freedom. As the fighting intensified, the Habsburg lines finally broke. Duke Leopold himself was killed on the battlefield, along with many of his nobles. When the dust settled, the victory at Sempach echoed throughout Europe. Once again, the impossible had happened. A disciplined force of citizen soldiers had defeated one of the continent's most powerful noble armies. The victories at Morgarten and Sempach transformed the reputation of the Swiss forever. Kings, emperors, and military commanders began studying their tactics with great interest. The long Swiss pike formations proved capable of stopping even the most feared cavalry charges. Throughout Europe, rulers realized that these mountain warriors possessed skills unlike any other soldiers of their age. Before long, Swiss mercenaries became some of the most sought-after fighters in Europe. Kingdoms competed to hire them, trusting their discipline, loyalty, and unmatched battlefield reputation. From the royal courts of France to the cities of Italy, Swiss soldiers fought in wars far from their homeland. Their courage became legendary, and their military traditions would influence European warfare for generations. Yet even greater challenges still lay ahead, as the changing world of religion, politics, and diplomacy would force Switzerland to choose a very different path, one that would eventually define the nation more than any battlefield victory ever could. As Switzerland's reputation as a military power continued to grow, Europe itself was changing. The 16th century brought one of the greatest religious upheavals in history. In the city of Zurich, a reformer named Huldrych Zwingli challenged long-established traditions within the church, calling for sweeping religious change. His ideas spread rapidly across the Swiss cantons, inspiring passionate supporters while deeply dividing communities that had once stood united. Before long, neighbors found themselves on opposite sides of faith, and the Confederacy faced one of its greatest internal challenges. Religious tensions soon erupted into armed conflict. Catholic and Protestant cantons fought bitter wars, proving that the greatest threats to Switzerland no longer came only from foreign armies, but also from disagreements within its own borders. Although these conflicts were painful, they taught an important lesson. Lasting strength could not be built through endless internal warfare. If the Confederation was to survive, its people would have to find ways to cooperate, despite their differences. That lesson became even more important during the devastating 30 Years' War, which began in 1618 and consumed much of Europe. Entire regions were destroyed. Millions of lives were lost through warfare, famine, and disease, and powerful kingdoms exhausted themselves in a conflict that seemed to have no end. Yet while the continent burned around them, the Swiss Confederacy largely remained outside the fighting. Protected by its mountains, strengthened by its local alliances, and determined to avoid becoming another battlefield, Switzerland gradually developed the policy that would define its future more than any military victory ever had: neutrality. Neutrality did not mean weakness. Switzerland continued to maintain capable defenses and carefully guarded its independence. The nation understood the terrible cost of war because its own history had been shaped by centuries of conflict. Choosing not to fight in the struggles of other nations became a strategy for survival, stability, and prosperity. Over time, this policy earned international respect and eventually became one of the defining characteristics of the Swiss state. Even as Switzerland embraced neutrality, one remarkable military tradition endured. Since the early 16th century, Swiss soldiers had served as the personal protectors of the Pope in Rome. Known today as the Swiss Guard, they remain one of the oldest continuously serving military units in the world. Dressed in their colorful Renaissance uniforms, they symbolize centuries of discipline, loyalty, and professionalism. Although their appearance has become iconic, their responsibility remains serious, protecting the leader of the Catholic Church, just as generations before them once protected kings and emperors across Europe. The centuries that followed brought enormous political and economic change. The old Confederation evolved into the modern Swiss federal state. Rather than concentrating power in a single ruler, Switzerland developed one of the world's most unique democratic systems. Citizens gained the ability to vote directly on important national issues through referendums and popular initiatives. Ordinary people became active participants in shaping their country's future, continuing the tradition of local decision-making that had existed in the Alpine valleys for hundreds of years. Switzerland also transformed itself into a global center of innovation, finance, and precision engineering. Its watchmakers became famous for unmatched craftsmanship. Its universities and research institutions produced world-class discoveries. International organizations established headquarters in Swiss cities, recognizing the country's stability and neutrality. Banks earned worldwide reputations for security, while companies pushed the boundaries of science, medicine, and technology. Surrounded by powerful neighbors, Switzerland proved that influence could be built through trust, reliability, and excellence, rather than conquest alone. Today, visitors often admire the country's breathtaking mountains, crystal-clear lakes, and peaceful villages, without realizing how much sacrifice lies beneath that beauty. Every ancient trail, medieval castle, and mountain pass carries memories of the people who refused to surrender their independence. Farmers stood against emperors. Small communities challenged mighty dynasties. Citizen soldiers defeated armies that seemed invincible. Generation after generation, the people of the Alps defended not only their homeland, but also the idea that freedom was worth any price. The story of Switzerland is not simply the history of one nation. It is the story of courage overcoming fear, unity defeating division, and determination triumphing over impossible odds. From the Celtic Helvetii and the legions of Julius Caesar to the medieval Confederates who shocked Europe at Morgarten and Sempach, every generation added another chapter to a remarkable legacy. Those victories eventually gave way to something even more extraordinary: the wisdom to choose peace after centuries of war. Perhaps that is Switzerland's greatest achievement. It did not become respected because it was the largest country, the richest kingdom, or the most powerful empire. It earned its place in history because ordinary people believed that their freedom was worth protecting, their promises were worth keeping, and their future was worth building together. High above Europe, where snow still crowns the ancient Alps and the echoes of history linger in every valley, the spirit of those first mountain communities lives on, a reminder that even the smallest nations can leave the greatest mark on the world.